To the media budget review now, and though analysts welcome the growth figures in sectors like agriculture and industry, there are questions about the ability of governments to carry out its various programs as they've had to cut down their revenue targets. Government is confident, however, that with the associated cutbacks in expenditure, it will ensure the nation's development does not suffer. Since yesterday, many perspectives have arisen on these issues. But first of all, let's remind ourselves of what the finance minister said in Parliament.
The GDP for the first quarter of 2017 grew by 6.6% against 4.4% for the same period in 2016. Inflation reduced to 12.1% at the end of June 2017 from 15.4% at end December 2016. Interest rates are on the decline. For example, the 91-day Treasury bill rates have reduced from 16.4% at end 2016 to 12.08% at end June 2017. The fiscal deficit as a percentage of GDP for the period January to June 2017 was 2.7% compared with a deficit of 4% over the same period in 2016. The primary surplus for January to June 2016 was 0.6% of GDP compared to a deficit of 1.3% over the same period in 2016. And the gross international reserves at the end of June 2017 was $5.9 billion, equivalent of 3.4 months of import cover, up from $4.9 billion at the end of December 2016, equivalent to 2.8 months of import cover. Mr. Speaker, interest rates have responded to government's economic policies and are now trending downwards. The Bank of Ghana reduced its monetary policy rate MPR by 450 basis points from January to July 2017. 200 basis points from 25.5% to 23.5% in March 2017, by 100 basis points in May to 22.5%, and further by 150 basis points to 21% in July 2017. The trend of lower interest rates we are seeing is in direct response to the equally consistent declines in headline inflation and inflation expectations, and the general improvements in the macroeconomic fundamentals. In response, the average interest rate on the 91-day bill has declined since December 2016 from 16.81% to 12.10% in June 2017, while the rates on the 182-day Treasury bill rate fell from 18.5% in December 2016 to 13.28% in June 2016.
Now, the opposition NDC thinks the finance minister is taking undue credit. Former Transport Minister and Deputy Ranking Member of the Finance Committee of Parliament, Fifi Kwete, was speaking on the Super Morning Show this morning.
Invariably, okay, we always give the impression as though the real difficulty has to do with how to manage an economy.
Right.
I want to say that oftentimes the problem is not the management of the economy. It's not really an issue that the person who is sitting in that seat hasn't got the competence. I think really everyone who has sat in that seat has been very good enough. I mean, let's just say in the very recent one, I work under Dr. Dufo. It's one of the best you can find. Subsequent to the Dufo, Setekwe became very, very good material. Who really has had the experience even before then. Subsequent to him, now Ken Oforiata, who is there. Even before that, I mean, Safo Mafo and also the late Bawiredu and Nakoto, say all of them really have what it takes. And if you spoke to all these people, I mean, one-on-one, it tells you their concerns were the same. The problem is not the competence to manage an economy. The problem is how to juggle the bigger boy, which has to do with the politics with the economy. That's where the difficulty often comes. Now, if you understood that, then you can also appreciate that before you really start judging whether really somebody is really getting in going, then you must see how much of that political pressure is there.
Right.
The beginning of every administration, there's really not very much political pressure. There's also a lot of massive goodwill. And that goodwill naturally gives you room to be able to do things which, when the pressure starts getting there, it's not that easy. You can, for example, get the consensus of cabinet along some of the tough lines that you will, the first year you could get that, but in the third year, getting to the fourth year when election is approaching, you don't easily get that. No matter even how great the president may be, and I've happened to have worked under two who were extremely very committed to do, what is right for country. I'm talking the late Prof. Mills and also President Mahama. Both of them were genuinely very concerned about ensuring that we do not lose track, especially of fiscal prudence. But when the going gets tough, trust me, and anyone will tell you, it becomes a different ball game. So that is what the discussion ought to be.
Now, Deputy Information Minister Kojo Nkrumah was also on the program and had this to say.
Yes, one of the biggest risks to our economy are the political realities. And there's a paper that myself and a few colleagues did that was published by the Institute for the Advancement of Development Economies, or Developing Economies, where we talk about the fact that if you look at the peaks in our election year deficit story, it tells you clearly the political challenges we have. And that is why right from the beginning of the year, even we as a government started sounding the caution that one of the first group of persons who must help not to throw the gains we are making or the stability we are making out of gear are the political actors, colleague ministers. They are usually the first to turn on the finance minister. Because when you start achieving these very disciplined fiscal targets that we are talking about, no, let's be honest, and then you are getting into the latter parts of the year, your colleague minister will ask you, so we have done better on the deficit target and my women want loans. What are you talking to me about? Spend some more, spend some more. I think even today we've been talking a bit about it. And so it is something we started reminding ourselves about. It is a risk that we continue to face, but we need to bite the bullet and deal with it. Because if we don't, and for political expediency, we keep throwing things out of gear, we'll always come back to square one. But that is why you notice that I think Dr. Sibi mentioned earlier that if you're looking at what we are seeing now today, in spite of the fact that the revenues are not coming in according to what we projected, we are disciplining expenditure. And I made the point earlier that what we have to do is to maintain it even through political challenges. Last year, for example, deficit on commitment basis, about 10% plus of GDP. GDP of about 167 billion. That's about 16 billion. Meanwhile, they are programmed to do 5%. But that's where the political realities hit home. So it is a challenge that we continue to face. We are beginning to show that we are disciplined on it, but I make the point that we have to maintain. The next point is this question of competence. And Fifi makes the argument that everybody knows what to do. I agree to a large extent that generally we know what to do. How to do it is where we differ. And that's what some persons may call competence. And I'll use a few examples. You'd notice that when Mr. Kenofrata read the budget, he referred to the fact that we have known for a number of budget cycles that we don't have fiscal space. And that what to do is to create fiscal space. Everybody knows that. How do you do it? And he raised, paragraphs from 3 budgets from my very good friend, Mr. Seth, and talked about the fact that Seth talked about it over and over again, but the how eluded us. And that what we are going to do is to bite the bullet and go for capping and realignment of earmarked funds. Today, it's subject of criticism. We'll see what the outturn says. But that is what we talk about when we say that we believe that we have a how to do it that is a bit different from what our friends. I'll give you another example. Single spine, as Mr. Seth talks about. You notice that there was a program for rolling on single spine over a longer tenor. But the previous administration literally crashed it in a shorter budget cycle. And it created huge distortions. They chose a how, which is different from the how that we had in mind. It is that how that I think when it gets to the colorful language part, as Fifi talked about, is branded as competence or the...
Kind of like free SH.
Let me just inform viewers that we are streaming this bulletin live on Facebook. But now, let's cross over to the University of Ghana, Legon, where economist Professor Peter Korte is standing by to tell us what he thinks. Good morning, sir, and thanks for your time. What are your views on the budget review presented yesterday?
Good morning, and good morning to you and your discerning viewers as well. The mid-year review is permissible, just like in any budgeting process. You need to review midstream. Although ideally, if you budget properly, you're able to forecast your values very well. You don't need a mid-year review. But be as it may, it's come to stay with us. The mid-year review presented us with the opportunity to interrogate the figures very well. We already knew the revenue shortfall, and therefore we're expecting the minister to tell us where the shortfalls have come from and what strategies are being put in place. But before that, I was expecting to see what caused the shortfall, the specifics about what caused the shortfall, and how he's hoping to address them so that in the second half of the year, we will not come back with this challenge of huge fiscal deficit and the rest. But that, for me, did not come. I rather had both ends of the debate, both the majority, minority, taunting and with all kinds of arguments. But I mean, we have a revenue shortfall. The main focus of the presentation is the revenue shortfall. So where did the shortfall come from? What happened? Why the disparity? Just like in any budgeting auditing process, if your shortfall or your variance is more than 5%, you have to explain why you had 5% and then remedies to address them. But that, for me, did not happen. But then I was quite also happy, though, that there is a talk of prioritizing expenditures. To match revenue, unlike in previous instances where even where revenues don't match, targets are not met, we continue to spend, and then we end up with huge variances. But this time there's a prioritization of expenditure. So it had its strengths as well as gaps, in my view, where and the hows and the whys did not come to us.
Right. So on the issue of revenue shortfalls, how is it going to affect the other sectors of the economy? For instance, with the development authorities that has been referred to by the minority?
Certainly it will affect the sectors, but that is where the prioritization comes in. There are some critical sectors of the economy where you cannot touch. So agriculture, the planting for food program, the one district, one factory, and many others. Some of these things are very critical if we really want to improve lives and enhance livelihood. So for those areas, we don't have to touch. But there are some expenditures that can be postponed, and that is left for the finance minister to sit down and look at those areas. Once the critical areas, the productive sectors are not touched or resources are made to those sectors, then we are likely to see the growth targets being met, and that can transform into jobs as well.
Now, you are referring to productive sectors which must not be touched. In your view, what are those key initiatives that if government will look at specifically, we can begin raking in the revenue to make up for this shortfall?
It's mainly agriculture and manufacturing. Those are the two critical areas. These two sectors employ a significant proportion of the labor force. It's not services, it is agriculture and manufacturing. So anything that government can do, as outlined in its budget, to ensure that these two key sectors are able to achieve their targets, that would be brilliant. So agriculture, we've been told about the planting for food program, and of course also trying to fight the fall armyworm the problem as well, and also issues about irrigation, trying to promote irrigated agriculture. When that is done, we can transform the agricultural sector significantly. We can also process some of the food items. So I'm not asking government to go into direct production, But through its One District, One Factory program, it can partner with the private sector to ensure that some of the agricultural products are processed, and that significantly generates jobs, promote growth. Then when you come to manufacturing, we've had quite a number of incentives that have been provided. I believe in the wisdom of the finance minister and his team in providing those tax reliefs, and the rest knew the lapse or the gap, in other words, the period to which the outcome would be felt. So would it be a year? Would it be 6 months? I think they knew in providing, before they provided those incentives. So I would expect that these incentives, the tax reliefs and the rest, will kick in and ensure that the private sector is able to promote its activities, so that we have more.
In the industrial sector, Prof, in the industrial sector particularly, how long do you think it will take for the sector to begin to respond to some of these interventions you are speaking of?
If I give you anything, it might be a guess estimate, because these things are done. I believe the key tax people should be able to tell you that time frame. But roughly, it should take about a year, 6 to 12 months, for you to see a lot of these things take effect. You know, it takes quite a short period to destroy, but it takes longer to fix. We saw the doomsaw and all the challenges we had with power supply. That affected a lot of private businesses, the manufacturing, the industrial sector especially, were highly affected. So they are now picking up, they are stabilizing. It will take quite some time for them to pick. So yes, the incentives are good, but we shouldn't expect the magic within 6 months. At least in 12 months and beyond, we are likely to see some effects, provided we provide the resources and continue to provide the enabling environment.
So finally, sir, since we are having these revenue shortfalls, you are recommending that we should focus on areas like agric and industry. Ghana is in need of huge social interventions. We are seeing a huge investment in education, 400 million Ghana cedis in September. Would you say it's advisable to put monies in areas like health insurance, like LEAP, places where we will not exactly be seeing returns on investment immediately?
No, certainly we can't do away with those sectors. In promoting agriculture, you need education. You need educated manpower. In promoting industry, you need educated manpower. So I'm not advocating that we should neglect those key or critical sectors entirely. What I'm saying is, in terms of the productive sectors, these are the areas we should focus on, agric and industry. But then, yes, education is very critical. We need to promote education. This concept, once you brought this in, let me quickly comment on this concept about free SHS. For me, it's a laudable idea, but I think the implementation, government has to engage more with stakeholders to streamline the process. You see, if you have a country with limited resources and you have additional resources, you will target and target very well. You don't pay education, you don't pay for tuition fees and many others for the rich. I mean, they can afford. If you have limited resources, I believe if we want to provide free SHS, let's target the category C schools or the B schools and leave the A's out, so that the resources will not be thinly spread. But if you say you're going to pay fees for every every child in secondary education, you are going to spread the resources thinly, and that can have challenges.
Prof, that will be proceeding on the assumption that every student in these category A schools is able to cater for his fees. I mean, the parents are able to cater for their fees.
Yeah, that's where a means testing can come in. You see, as for the C schools, they are deprived, they lack resources. But the A's, most of them are resourced. So if there are some in category A schools who cannot afford, that is where you target them. So a means testing approach will be most ideal. than spreading
but Prof, we are nearly out of time, but please, I'm sorry, I'll have to ask this. Shouldn't we rather be focusing on the students, because the free SHS is a student-targeted scholarship scheme, rather than focusing on schools, if you are going to do means testing to find who to support and who we shouldn't?
Yes, the free is you're very much right. It's on the student. So the means testing will be with the students. But also we can't do that and neglect infrastructure. You can't do that and neglect teacher training. You can't do that and neglect provision of goods and services. So it's a whole approach that you need to target. And if you have limited resources, it is the grade C schools that are most deprived. And therefore, in targeting the students, you also have to earmark some resources towards these grade C schools.
Mm. Right. Your final words, Prof, on the budget review.
Well, my final word is that we have to go back to the figures again, interrogate them, and find out why the revenue shortfall, in which specific areas. Was it import duty? We need to interrogate them and also find out why the shortfall. Is it because people are not importing or they are not paying the right duties? Then we tackle them. I know there are some reforms within customs, for instance, but we need to know more about what the main challenges are. Why are we recording this revenue shortfall, and what measures are we putting in place to ensure that we meet our revenue targets?
Thank you very much, Professor Peter Korte, for your time. He's an economist with the University of Ghana. This is News Desk.